Thank you very much, Andrés, for your presentation. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to bring you today my story, a story that I'm bringing all the way from Europe about a very concerning matter. It's about consumerism. So, let me say, at the beginning of this century, this guy, Zygmunt Bauman, one of the most significant social thinkers of our times, used for the first time the notion of liquidity to describe Western societies in the age of late modernity. And most of us in our old European continent were very superficial and very wrong by interpreting Bauman's liquid society, the theory, as a kind of nostalgia for the previous stage of Western modern society. That is to say, an early modernity characterized by a rational, well-organized, stable, solid system whose foundation was based on the perpetuity of immutable principles and values. And I would be very cautious in indulging in any sort of nostalgia for that kind of solidity, since one is actually forgetting that those kind of societies were very hard, rigid, and therefore very fragile societies. Societies that were run by a deeply aggressive ideology. And we shouldn't forget that the presumed solidity of the 20th century's Western system was in reality the result of the disgregation of colonial imperialism. It was the firmness proclaimed by charismatic chiefs, but also tyrants, who used to, with their loud voices, to ignite the bellicosity and the thirst for revenge of deeply impoverished and totally subordinated masses of people. We know today that those papier-mâché solid constructions generated some of the bloodiest wars of all times, and please let us not forget that during the last century, 70 million people died, 40 million only in Europe, because of solid bellicosity. But if we zoom into Europe at the middle of last century, into the wasteland left behind by the two world wars, we see that at that point, the sun of a new age rose, and it was the sun of the age of mass consumerism. It was a new and happy ideology, and it was singing and dancing boogie-woogie. And we joined the dance floor with no reluctancy. We also bought that ticket to the paradise called American Dream, that we learned about in Hollywood movies and tasted in Coca-Cola and Marlboro cigarettes. And that was really the beginning, I think, of our late modern liquid society. A society dominated by mass media and the mass market's new ideology. An ideology that by its very nature needed to become fluid, soft, and persuasive in order to seduce people and make them dream. The myth of consumerism was thus established as an egalitarian utopia of social mobility, work flexibility, social elasticity, because only such a pliability would have been able to absorb the booming impetus of an economy that was supposed to grow at exponential rates forever. In less than half a century, mass consumption, economy, and culture expanded globally. The long wave of the liquid mass society became a flood that submerged whole nations across continents. The only problem is that today, the debt-driven hyper-consumerism fever on one side and the so-called creative, speculative financial economy on the other side have together transformed whole countries into swamps of new poverty. Today, our liquid societies are not able to embark the tsunami of the global financial disruption provoked by some, actually very few, centers of financial power that for the last 3 decades have been sharing only among them the profit of rampant speculations, most of them based on negative ecological and social balances. Our liquid societies are floating, drowning in an ocean of debt. States cannot shoulder their own, much less the other states' default, provoked by brainless financing. And when they suddenly introduce their austerity measures, the scary asymmetry of such obnoxious unfairness is becoming evident for the many people and is provoking, on one side, depression, on the other side, unrest and turmoil, from west to east, from north to south, on our globalized planet. Politicians and economists are yelling and evoking growth. We need growth, otherwise we are lost. But Lady Growth is popped out. Okay, so what? What can we do? Dive into despair, drown into prophecies? Absolutely not. Because our liquid societies, exactly because they aren't solid and rigid constructions, they hold within themselves a crucial fundamental quality: resilience. In the root of the word resilience, we find the notion of risalio, that for the ancient Latins meant the effort of climbing back on the boat that had been overturned by the tempest. From a psychological point of view, the resilience of individuals and collectivities is the capability to persist, to insist, to not lose heart in spite of all the many negative events. And it is what makes people reorganize themselves and continually reinvent and readapt to new realities. Resilience is a given for people living in our liquid late modern societies, since the presumed modus vivendi, the univocal way of life of modernity, has dissolved, and we can definitely say that people are readapting their way of life and their value systems after the shock of realizing that they are in a permanent state of precariousness. Let me now share with you some snapshots of the mindset and the motives of people living in Western economies and in a marketplace that got hyper-saturated with all kinds of material goods. Let's speak about the traumata of our excess civilization. We all know, for example, that the so-called BRICS countries, in those countries there is an overabundance of a good that has become extremely scarce in the Western post-industrial societies, and that is hope. The hope in the growth of prosperity that is mainly based on achieving Western lifestyles and joining the consumerist culture. While in late modern Western societies, we see the end of the dream of constantly growing material prosperity and of social ladder climbing. This was the dream of John and Jane Doe when they were, until quite recently, still identifying themselves as members of an increasingly wealthy middle class. For them, the Damocles sword of the next energy crisis and the soaring cost of basic foods and of their children's education and of health care has become a serious problem. They have noticed that the bursting of the speculative bubbles, as well as every cut to the welfare, has also left deep holes in their own pockets. They know that our planet Earth is seriously sick. They watch wars and climate disasters on televisions. They see new waves of migrants floating into their countries, and suddenly They feel that everything is one way or another interconnected. Thus, the life of John and Jane Doe has changed abruptly and quite unexpectedly. Concerns about their standard of living are added to private crises, which are accelerated by the decline of the traditional family model and the dissolution of obsolete gender stereotypes. In view of the economic, social, and environmental turbulences of our time, our previous lifestyle aimed at material, ephemerally hedonistic, and irrationally entertaining consumption can no longer provide the security they desperately need today. Okay, let's talk now about what could be regarded as the four main consumer psychological patterns that drive the different ways people are activating their resilience capability through consumption. And please let me alert you, standard behaviors don't exist, that's obvious, but even so, we can orient ourselves by following the wisdom of Carl Gustav Jung's human character archetypes theory. The first sensuality-driven consumer pattern is today the I want to have more, I want to have it cheaper, and is related to the reckless, hedonistic, warm-blooded, sensual character. It is the character archetype on which our accessibilization is based, and it drives the dominant pattern of all those social realities still defined by a low rate of social awareness, which are still dominated by the classical consumerism's basic instincts. These consumers don't care if goods are made in China, Bangladesh, or Brazil, if they are made in sweatshops or by exploiting children's labor, nor if their manufacturing is hoovering up our scarce and finite planet resources. They only understand that these cheap products are precisely what enable them to more or less maintain their standard of living despite a declining real income. And this is the typical pattern we find in those society or in those societal groups that are still mainly dominated by the persuasive power of traditional mass media, with TV in the central position. We must be aware that this command for cheaper and cheaper, more is not enough stuff, brings today the efficiency of large-scale based industrial mass consumption system into big troubles. Because when consumers just go for more of the cheapest offerings, they drive down not just goods production unit costs and product quality, but also drive up the collateral cost of fewer safety precautions, larger ecological footprints, and more indignity for the workers. This kind of consumerist pattern will persist until prices deflation will inexorably hit bottom, while people's purchasing power will fall through the bottom. When the shopping binge based on voracity will be forced to consumption austerity, it will be substituted by malaise and a deep sense of loss. At that point, aggressive and panic-driven consumer behaviors might rise. On the other hand, this kind of consumer would be the best ally of the third industrial revolution proclaimed by thinkers as Jeremy Rifkin and by adherents of natural capitalism, because if we would make it in time to reconvert our whole industrial mass market system into a green real economy, this kind of consumer would be the #1 green consumer. Although I must say that the precondition of such a shift would need design, the design of beauty, pleasure, desirability, embedded into a new generation of sustainable product offer, The design of a new aesthetic, of such a new ethos, would be the conditio sine qua non of such a conversion. The second resilience pattern is based on rationality. To this category belong consumers that only buy what they have been investigating, examining, comparing, and value matching against all possible goods on the marketplace. And those are the most shopping-reluctant consumers. If consumers of the first categories I previously described are driven by shopping bulimia, consumers of this category are affected by shopping anorexia. They are kind of consumers who are not so much impressed by advertising campaigns and any other marketing technique, but eventually always notice the discrepancy between the promises of advertising wonderland and their asymmetry with the real world. They are the professional consumer who consistently turn their attention to quality-price ratio and of what they eventually are still ready to buy. And furthermore, these kind of consumers are not on their own when they go shopping. Thanks to the social media, they exchange their knowledge and expertise about what to buy and form alliances with others for smarter consumption. They are the watchdogs of consumer goods marketplace, and they are the ones that whenever a new scandal happens in the consumer goods business are activating the word-of-mouth propaganda, and by doing so, they can destroy brands overnight that are not behaving in what they consider a correct way. All what they do is very right and very true, but also very wrong, because the counterpart of such a rational evaluating approach is not a rational economic machine that one can fine-tune through rational principle today. Economy, in times of crisis, is a deeply unreasonable machine. The third, sometimes considered to be a more evolved consumer pattern, is based on feelings, on sentiments. That is an empathic approach, and they choose what they buy from a values-driven perspective. And this is the category of consumers that, for example, have today also identified as the culprit of the injustice of our world, globalization and delocalization. They are the consumers who try to reduce the effects of the crisis shock by going back to the purchasing of local products that support local communities. The low food miles notion that usually stands for low carbon products that haven't been imported from faraway countries has become an issue for the many people in Western countries. In my country, where we always tend to exaggerate, we call it 0 kilometer products. And the most popular 0 kilometer label at the moment stands for products that are manufactured in the only place with the lowest possible rate of mobility, that is in prison, with the profits going to the detainees' cooperatives. And there are many of these products than you can imagine, one for all. The fashion label Codice a sbarre, which means barcode, but can also mean behind bars in Italian. It is possibly the only Italian fashion brand where customers can be 100% sure that it is really made in Italy. But apart from Italy, today we see people in most of our Western countries joining together armor with rakes and hoes and seeds in order to use the smallest patch of disused land in the city on their roofs and balcony to grow chicken and vegetables. And they do that not only to relieve their household budget, but also to revitalize the old model of self-supply on a few small spots of freedom. The positive aspect of this consumer pattern is its vision based on solidarity and mutual exchange, two old and timeless remedies humanity always used to withstand crisis repercussions on their lives and communities. The myth of autarkic, self-sustaining systems is the dream in this case, but the dark side of this attitude is the risk of understanding communities as closed, isolated, stagnant local systems with all the accompanying implication of regression and evolution. There is finally a fourth category of resilient consumer pattern based on intuition. This character merely looks at the world as it is until, in a glance, solutions are seen that can solve a problem. Intuition is the capability to smell the air in order to make the right choice. And this is an attitude that implies a readiness for risk. Inductive, resilient characters are also very open to paradoxes. And I like to underline the paradox of a category of consumers who are today turning around the non-logical paradigm of less is more. There is no rational way to calculate and give the evidence that less is more is true, that consuming and producing less is giving us back more jobs, more free time, more happiness and meaningfulness. Less is more is simply based on the principle that not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts. Albert. To this category belong all those individuals and communities that are designing new models of prosperity, new ways of life, and new style of thoughts. The most innovative and most promising social innovations that go in that direction seem to be driven by the so-called transition movement, which is made of new social enterprises like cooperatives, time banks, social businesses, community-owned asset ventures. Millions of individuals, groups, and organizations are busy worldwide in redesigning ways of life, but also new business models to qualitatively produce and globally share resources. Resources such as energy, matter, time, skill, software, space, or food. And this is in an area where design and design thinking plays a crucial role for the needed change. Because design, same as art, is mainly based on the inductive capability of producing new visions of possible futures. The resilience of all kinds of social innovators and avant-crafters who are worldwide persisting in making things turn to the better with the same strength of water streams or water drops is what gives us hope for the future we thought we had lost. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by giving you a bit of the latest news. The last act has begun in the Odyssey of consumption, the return of Ulysses to Ithaca. Because just as Ulysses, after his long wanderings and encounters with too many beguilements and illusions, also people today, after having almost drowned in the ocean of so many consumerist fleeting seductions, delusions, and disappointments, are also resiliently making it to reach the shore of a promising island made of enjoyable, reasonable, lovable, and innovative sustainable futures. The era of excess civilization is finished. It must finish. That party is over. We know that it must be over. But a new feast can start that is rich with happiness, but respects frugality. Consumerist societies have to learn this and apply a little and simple insight if they want to survive. Consuming less, conjugating with consuming better, actually, let's say the best. This would be a sign of the wisdom of resilience, which tell us that the end of a story is always the beginning of a new story, a better story. Thank you very much.